Hello, hello, hello everybody, and welcome to Not Your Nana's Norms with your host, Dr. Amy, sociologist and educator. Before we go on any further, I would like to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people, the traditional custodians of the land I am recording on today, and of course to extend my respect to elders past and present, and to all First Nations peoples listening today. As always, Not Your Nana's Norms focuses on a particular setting, place or situation, and of course, those taken for granted social norms and practices that appear so normal and natural, but are actually a delicate performance that we take on every day. Today, we are going to continue our fascinating exploration into the world of toiletiquette, the social norms and unspoken rules of public toilets, bathrooms, and all things lavatorial. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Now, before we continue, I wanted to answer a few of your questions and to share some lovely comments from you, my fabulous, fabulous listeners. So the first question I had was, when do you drop your episodes? This was from SK. Well, look, my goal is to get at least one episode out by the first Wednesday of every month. But if I get time to drop more, I will. Just make sure that you follow my podcast on your chosen platform, because then you're going to be alerted straight away as soon as something drops. Another question from PJ. They said, some podcasters drop episodes every week or every 2 weeks. Why don't you? Well, look, I would love to do that, PJ. But I am an unpaid carer, so my hands are quite full. Plus, also right now, this is very much a passion project and I don't get paid. So, cheeky reminder to PJ and to others, if you do want to see more episodes or you want them out more quickly, you could consider becoming a patron on Patreon from just $3 a month. Something to think about. And I also got a lovely review from Bid Swin. She said, I love the pastime of digging up and even upending the ways we human acts. Go, Dr. Amy. Thank you very much. So please, everyone, when you do get a moment, continue to rate and review and send your comments and questions, because it really does help keep me in the charts and also let more people know about Not Your Nana's Norms. And a reminder, of course, that you can email me at any time. It's all lowercase, no spaces, notyournanasnorms@outlook.com. And you can chat with me on the Not Your Nana's Norms Facebook page and, of course, via Patreon. Alrighty, so a quick refresher from my last episode. We talked about how I spent a year of my life sitting in public toilet cubicles, taking secret notes and observing everyday social norms in female public toilets. So let's take you back to 2002. Oh, goodness. So I'm sitting there in the female public toilet cubicle within the shopping centre or department store. I'm probably listening to Kenny G on repeat and, maybe wishing that I had some funny graffiti to read, but also trying really hard to sort of download everything that I could remember before I entered that cubicle. Then I would be straining my ears to listen to what's happening out there in that communal basin mirror area, because of course I can't see anything from the cubicle. I mean, maybe a tiny bit of someone's coat through the crack of the door, but, definitely not very much. And of course, too, I can only really sit there for a maximum of, 5 minutes, because I really needed to continue my covert role as an ethical but very much undercover researcher. So, what did I hear and uncover when I was sitting in those loos? And what are the social norms of female public toilets that I observed in 2002 that I know you've all been waiting to hear? So, drum roll please. These are my top 5 cubicle-related toiletiquette norms within female public toilets. Norms that seem taken for granted and natural, but were clearly socially constructed. Especially, we noticed it when someone broke one of them by accident. Alright, so, cubicle-related toiletiquette number 1. All female public toilet users were expected to line up single file and use the first available cubicle. And of course, no one's allowed to push in or skip the queue unless everyone in that queue agrees that, a particular person's need is really great. So, for example, you might have a little kid or a heavily pregnant woman who's absolutely bursting, and so everybody agrees, yep, they need to go in first. Alright, toiletiquette number 2. Bad smells and loud noises coming from cubicles or in the toilet block itself are not socially acceptable. But if someone does unintentionally break this social norm, then everyone in there tries to pretend like it didn't happen to avoid embarrassment for all involved. And to be honest, it's really, really rare for someone to own up. Toiletiquette number 3. Peeps should lock the cubicle door and ideally use that toilet as quickly as possible. Equally, the folks who are standing outside waiting to use the toilet, they don't say, hurry up or be faster, because the unspoken and taken for granted rule appears to be that everyone's allowed a reasonable amount of time to manage their bodily functions. And honestly, folks, really, people will only intervene if they feel there's cause for concern. So, look, if someone was moaning or crying or taking way longer than other usual toilet users. And, if there is some concern, people just tend to ask politely and gently things like, are you okay? Do you need help? Also, how awful is it when you have to use the cubicle with a door that doesn't lock properly, or being that person in the front of the queue who has to sort of, gingerly push against the door that is closed but says vacant, only to hear that sort of panicked voice, I'm in here, don't come in. Okay, so toiletiquette number 4. It is expected that you will keep your cubicle relatively clean and tidy, and if spills or other issues occur, then, you need to clean that up before the next person enters. Because how embarrassing is it when you've been standing in line and you're waiting, and then you look down and see that free loo, but, you've accidentally entered that toilet, that one that's blocked or is gross or is mess all over the floor. And then don't we just make sure that everyone hears our announcement that it was not us, and that, of course, we recommend that others do not use that toilet before we get back in line quick smart. Okay, so toiletiquette rule number 5. you are expected to stick to the confines of your own cubicle. So, you don't put your leg or your foot or your bag under someone else's cubicle. And of course, don't even think about looking over the top. And yes, we can hear everything that goes on in the next cubicle. But, we all seem to agree that our cubicle is like our own mini moment of physical privacy. So only our bodies and our items are allowed in it. It's also really interesting to watch the transition of people going from that semi-public communal space, where the sinks and the taps and the queue of the other prospective toilet users are, into that cubicle space. Because you'd often hear friends arriving together and they're chatting away and they're laughing and they're joking. But then the minute they enter the cubicle, the conversations pause. Unless, of course, someone needs some toilet paper or something like that. But everyone's quiet until as soon as they all open their doors and then they're all back at the sink, then they're just chatting away and resume their conversation like those last few minutes just didn't exist. So all these social norms appear normal and natural for the whole group, and everyone who enters seems like they've kind of signed some sort of unspoken, unwritten contract. But like so many norms, they often go against the individual bodily needs or wants. So, how many times have you been required to stand in a line to go to the toilet when you're absolutely bursting and you just really want to run straight into that cubicle? And, if you do need to do a number 2, oh gosh, how on earth are you supposed to do this quickly and silently without any smell? And what are you going to do if you've got lots of shopping and bags and jackets and that sort of thing? How are you going to ensure that they don't accidentally go under the other toilet? The socially accepted perimeter. The cubicle becomes this little private space, a kind of mini moment of visual privacy. But only really as long as you're quick and you stay within your walls and you avoid making any bodily sounds or unpleasant smells. Now, the next lot of norms within female public toilets relate to what people do after they exit the cubicle and they're in that communal semi-public space, which, has things like mirrors, taps, sinks, towels, or hand dryers, that sort of thing. The number one expected social norm there is that everyone has to wash their hands after using the cubicle. Even, of course, if you were just using said cubicle as a covert researcher. And then from there, the activities range from drying hands with paper towel or using an airdryer. And other activities included things like adjusting or preparing or beautifying the body or face before people were going outside. So for example, you might be straightening or flattening your hair, maybe you're tucking in your t-shirt. Perhaps you might be applying some makeup that's come off or looking a bit different than what you want. Or, just, checking out your butt in the mirror to make sure everything's looking okay. The social norms that occurred whilst people carried out these beautification procedures were also really interesting because, for the most part, other toilet users are expected to appear oblivious during these activities, to ignore these private acts of self-grooming. So the social norm works as a kind of collective denial that, of course, we don't notice what other people do in public toilets, even though we really all do. We just don't say anything out of respect and to avoid social embarrassment or shame, and because we're all sticking to the accepted and expected social norms. But sometimes I also saw a really wonderful sense of support and camaraderie, especially when another bathroom user needed help or something. So for example, everyone jumping to help someone who's lost their hair clip on the floor, or, helping another bathroom user to problem solve how to get that hand dryer started. Also, toilet users would assist each other prior to exiting the communal area. So, for example, if someone had their skirt tucked into their knickers, or maybe they've got toilet paper on their shoe, or a zipper that's been left undone. This camaraderie helps toilet users avoid potential embarrassment or shame that would ensue if they were to enter that public space outside the bathroom with their bodies or their clothing in disarray. Now, to be fair though, whilst bathroom users will speak up to help each other out, conversations between strangers tend to focus on small talk, the weather outside, or maybe sometimes useful site-specific information, like, the location of the bank or the cafe, especially because we were in a shopping centre. However, when groups of people that were known to each other entered the public toilet together, the conversations were always much, much, much more varied, and to be honest, way more entertaining for young Dr. Amy. So, private conversations would continue whilst they were in the space, or sometimes they'd even start up a new conversation because of the lack of male identifying people using the space. So, for example, I'd regularly hear groups of teenage girls chatting about the boys in their lives once they entered the toilets. Another core topic that I observed revolved around things like beauty or fashion or ideals. I often heard women giving advice to each other about the best clothes to wear or makeup or things like that. Now, of course, as per the usual bathroom social norms, the rest of us are expected to pretend that we're not listening and we can't hear anything they're talking about. But again, as I said, of course we can all hear them. And, let's be honest, public toilets, they're probably one of the most echoey spaces ever. So even if you don't want to hear it, you can. Now, the funniest things that happen in public toilets almost always happen due to those notoriously oblivious social norm rule breakers, aka kids. So, for example, imagine everyone quietly standing in the queue, waiting for the toilet, and then all of a sudden we hear this little kid near the back of the line saying, "Mummy, I really, really, really need to poo." Or that kid who praises everyone for their good work. "Well done, lady. Well done, mum. Well done, girl. You're doing a great job." Or, singing. Oh my goodness, so much cute singing. Things like, "Come on, poo. Come on, poo. Come on, poo. You know what to do." Oh, they're so adorable. And then, of course, there's my absolute favourite one, which, I'm sure we've all heard at some point. "Mum, what's that white thing you're putting in your front bottom?" Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Poor mum. So, all through my studies, I actually worked as a nanny, and then many years later, I became a parent of one such unintentional rule breaker. So, I was now granted access to another toilet option that I did speak briefly about in the previous episode, the parent room. And of course, once you've researched a topic and observed the social norms of a space, you can't just put that genie back in the bottle. So I was acutely conscious, whether I wanted to be or not, of the social norms of the parent room space too. Now, for those of you who've not had the pleasure of using these parent room bathroom spaces, they often open via a wide automatic door, basically allowing easy access for prams and baby carriers and that sort of thing. You know, they've got plenty of change tables. There's a large cubicle which has a adult toilet and a tiny cute mini-sized toilet for little people to use. There might be a little play area and some couches for infant feeding. And you know, sometimes there's also little private curtained off rooms so that people can use those for breastfeeding. And look, overall, I found them to have really similar social norms to the female public toilets. But of course, the outsider or person who's not welcome in these spaces isn't usually based on gender. It's based on the person who does not have an infant or a small child in tow. Now, I say usually because after speaking to a few dads and a few male-identifying carers and other mums or female-identifying carers, the consensus seems to be that it is largely still seen as a predominantly female domain. And dads have told me that they sometimes do feel a bit uncomfortable or unwelcome in these spaces, especially when they are alone with their kiddos. So, you know, without a female identifying grown-up in tow. And, you know, to be honest, I was a bit sad to hear this because it's 2026 in Australia, but, you know, it makes sense when we look into some of the history. So, you know, for decades, baby care spaces were really designed with the assumption that mothers will do the caring and fathers will do the helping or just the visiting. And so when a dad or a trans parent or a non-binary parent uses the room, some people feel like it kind of breaks that old script, even though that script is really outdated. And this is a case of what they call norm lag. So basically where society changes faster than people's expectations of the social norms. I think also some people feel uncomfortable sharing a small private space with someone from a different gender. And, you know, this is usually framed around, well, what happens if that person sees me breastfeeding? Or what if a man comes in while I'm changing the baby? But, folks, these rooms are designed for caregivers, not gender categories. And again, that discomfort comes from social norms, not actual risk. We also see some concerns coming from people who just aren't used to seeing trans dads with babies or non-binary parents or mums who just don't look like the stereotype. And again, their discomfort is about unfamiliarity. It's not about danger. And again, this is where gender norms collide with real families in the 21st century. And of course, you know, parents are always hyper aware of, you know, who's near their child, what the space feels like, whether something seems off. And, you know, sometimes these instincts get misdirected towards gender rather than behaviour. And it's basically a social pattern because people use gender as a shortcut for safety even though it's really unreliable, especially in this day and age. My PhD research explored gender norms in relation to childcare, so we will probably likely cover this topic further in later episodes, but I am really curious to hear your experience and thoughts. So what's it like now for new mums and dads, and do you feel safe and comfortable using the parent rooms? Have you ever had any issues with gender of the people using them? And, many of the social norms that I was used to from female public toilets were the same in parents' rooms. So, we still waited in the queue, we cleaned down our surfaces, we kept within the boundaries of the personal space, and, we tried really hard to adhere to these social norms. But, little kids, like we said, they really rarely followed the expected social norms. And yes, of course, you're trying to breastfeed your baby in the curtained off room, and then you get a little curious toddler who slides in on their tummy or their back and they say, "What are you doing in here, lady?" Or, the kid or your kid opening the bathroom door while you're sitting on the toilet because they've finished on the toilet. And of course, then all the other parents and children can see you and your naked butt sitting on the toilet. Great. But, to be honest, within these spaces, my experience was that the camaraderie between parents and caregivers was really top-notch. We all understood and forgave these little social faux pas because we know little kids couldn't help themselves and they were just being completely honest. And because they don't know and they don't understand these pesky social norms yet. Plus, we would all help each other. So if someone needed an extra baby wipe or maybe, how about I read my book to your toddler and my toddler while you go breastfeed? That sort of thing. And everyone also always tried to keep an eye out for all the kids there too, to make sure that no little people crept outside of that automatic door. And basically the usual public toilet social norms were really quite relaxed and child-centred and created that kind of safe space and hopefully I would say less judgmental space for parents. And a space that we could escape from the busy, less child-friendly public space outside of the parent room toilets. Now, of course, this being not your nana's norms, we need to reflect a bit on what our nanas thought about the social norms of public toilets. As I mentioned last time in the previous episode, the number one rule of public toilet use for this generation is that we don't talk about public toilet use. But I will say that my nana wasn't one to beat about the bush. If she felt that something was out of line or, someone was going against the expected social norms of a space. And so I do feel pretty certain that if someone had cut in front of us in the toilet queue or maybe made a huge mess in the toilet, there definitely would have been no end of tut-tutting. And, I can almost see her in her prime, escorting or scolding any male-identifying person who dared to venture into the ladies' room. And, my sisters and I also knew that toilet-related jokes or similar humour was just not going to be tolerated by Nana. Because for the silent generation, queues weren't just lines, they were moral order. So to our nanas, queue jumping means someone thinks they're more important, someone is ignoring the shared rules, or someone is disrespecting the group. And for this generation, fairness and politeness were deeply tied to respectability. So when someone cuts in, our nanas aren't just annoyed, they feel like the social fabric is wobbling. Plus, our nanas grew up in a world where bodily functions were private, bathroom humour was considered childish or rude, and adults were expected to be composed in public. And so fart jokes feel like we're crossing a boundary, lowering the tone, bringing that backstage behaviour into the front stage public space. And so, it's not the joke itself, it's more that the joke breaks the old rule of keeping certain topics behind closed doors. And from a young age, the silent generation was taught to, don't draw attention to yourself, don't disturb others, don't embarrass anyone, and keep things tidy, orderly, and polite. So, cue cutting and fart jokes and making a mess in public bathrooms violate those lessons, all in different ways. And so Nana's tut-tutting is basically a reaction to what she sees as disorder, disrespect, or a slip in standards. It's basically her way of saying, this is not how we behave in public. So, before I wrap up today's episode, I wanted to briefly comment on an invention that I saw popping up from about the late 1990s, and it's really become a lot more common in many Australian cities, and that is this fully automated self-cleaning public toilet. Now, honestly, I don't know about you guys, but these toilets kind of freak me out. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but I actively avoid them if I can. And so I was thinking about why. Why do I avoid them? And I think it's that feeling that, you're being timed, or that maybe the technology might somehow fail and you'll be stuck in the toilet, or alternatively, maybe that the automatic door opens while you're still sitting on the toilet with your pants down, or, maybe somehow the sink goes berserk and it starts self-cleaning while you're still in there. I don't know. But this is actually a really great starting point to discuss further in future episodes, perhaps around the social norms of new and emerging technologies. But look, if you do have any funny stories around using fully automatic toilets, please do feel free to share. Because I do know that there's actually a real range of different toilet options available across the globe. And, look, I've definitely seen people struggling with those automatic soap or taps or dryers. So, where do I put my hands on this thing to get it work? It's kind of an up, down, turn around, dance sort of thing half the time. I also wanted to touch base on the other ways that folks use what we could call the privately public or perhaps publicly private toilet cubicle. So as we talked about, this is really a space that's a tiny little place of privacy. And, so for some people, it could be used as a place of sanctuary or safety, which is kind of next to, but completely separate from the outside public world. You think about that little primary school kid who just needs a place to hide from the bullies, or maybe the teenager who's just been dumped by her boyfriend and needs somewhere to cry, or even more sadly, the person who has nowhere else to sleep or rest, and so they choose that only lockable space available. There are, of course, also some less legitimate or potentially illegal activities that occur in public bathrooms. Activities that are definitely not widely considered socially acceptable or upheld by most public toilet users. So things like the partygoers using the quasi-privacy of the cubicle to indulge in less than legal substances, or the couple who just couldn't wait to get a room, so to speak. And there's also been some really interesting and very controversial early research completed, particularly around the 1970s, regarding anonymous, let's call them encounters, occurring within male public toilets. And if you're interested in learning more about that, look up Lord Humphreys. So the first name is spelt Laud, and then it's Humphreys, and the book's called Tea Room Trade. I most definitely never witnessed anything remotely like any of these things during my 2002 covert research. But then, that research occurred during school hours, within middle-class suburban shopping centres and department stores. And of course, my goal was to explore that mundane, everyday activity and social norms that occurred in female public toilets. So, I truly, truly hope that you enjoyed this exploration into the everyday, unspoken, taken for granted social norms of public toilets. And if you liked this episode, then please do keep an eye out for the next episode, which is entitled Meals, the Social Norms of Eating in Public Spaces, such as, cafes and restaurants and that sort of thing. We're going to explore the norms around what we eat, how we eat it, when we eat, who we eat with, and so much more. So that's pretty exciting. And of course, we're going to unpack our Nana's expectations, including my Nana's all-time favourite meal-related saying, which was, elegant sufficiency. So I can't wait. It should be really, really fun. Please join me and encourage everyone you know to listen as well, because we all experience these social norms in everyday life. We just don't notice them because they're unspoken and taken for granted. And as I said, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your funny stories and experiences, and, particularly those from other cultures and countries and other areas of Australia. And finally, please do continue to follow the podcast on your preferred platform, to rate and review, and to share. Share it with everybody. Your friends, your mum, your colleagues, your dentist, anyone you think who might enjoy this. I can't wait to see you all then, folks. So have a wonderful few weeks. Signing off.